My name's Alicia Blum-Ross, and I am the Global Head of Youth Safety by Design at TikTok.
So just as a general question, what does safer internet mean for you?
First of all, I think young people are all so different, and there's so many different ages and stages that young people go through. So it means a slightly different thing at different ages. But overall, I would say the ability to connect, create, learn, get inspiration, learn about new places and spaces without fear of exploitation, of harassment and bullying, without fear that you'll be financially exploited or that someone may contact you for ill purposes. So really it's centering the opportunities and making sure that young people have the opportunity to get to those great experiences online without feeling fearful for their safety or their friends' safety.
I want to know, as we branch out into our secondary education, trying to practicalize our education into these very advocacy-based topics. How did your studies inform youth tech in your career now?
I love that question. So I have a PhD in anthropology, which is not the background that you would think most people working in the tech industry would have. So I'm probably a great example where finding something that you're passionate about and interested in and want to dedicate your time and studies to, you will find applications for in your career. I think a lot of young people think they just have to follow one straight path, and if you get this degree, that's going to be the thing that opens up doors. I can't tell you the number of times I feel like I use my anthropology degree, because anthropology is about learning about and respecting and being curious about other cultures, and also really not necessarily taking things for granted, like going deep with people. Sorry, this is a long answer, so I think actually it's such a hugely crucial skill in my job in tech, is like being able to use those skills about learning and curiosity, not like taking answers for granted. And I work with a lot of people who have business degrees and engineering degrees, and that's fantastic. And it's great that we bring our expertise together. But I think that the background that I have in social sciences actually brings a lot to the table that can sometimes be underappreciated. And fundamentally, I think if you're doing something you're interested in, you're going to find a career path that comes from that, even if, like me, it is not obvious from the start where that career is going.
I love that.
Yeah. Completely unrelated question. What do you think you found most effective in engaging youth perspectives in your work? And what is something that you think social media companies can still improve on in regards to involving youth?
I love that. The phrase from disability rights advocacy has always been nothing about us without us. And I think that that is so true for thinking about how young people should have a seat at the table when it comes to not only tech product design, but also tech policy and conversations, because as we've been discussing today, these are like your lived experiences. These are your lives, right? And I think that sometimes people really don't actually know how to listen to young people, whether that's like setting up the mechanism to do it or often coming in with a preconceived notion of what they think young people are going to say. So at TikTok, we have a youth council, which is actually really international, which I love because we get perspectives from young people from like Morocco and India and Japan and the US and parts of Europe. And I feel like that really gives us this really varied understanding that young people's lives are so different and complex, although something like using TikTok as a teenager may be a global experience as well. So I think it's both setting up the context and then also really being open-minded, because I do feel like young people, even I've been doing youth engagement research and like design informed thinking for 15-ish years, and I still feel like I hear things all the time that surprise me.
I loved how you talked about your background in like combining and synthesizing a lot of diverse inputs from your social studies education. I want to know how you create an environment to combine those inputs that are sometimes resulting in the least worst, as you said, as a panel.
Yeah, it's a really good question. A lot of times, especially when you work in a really big organization like I do, and I worked at Google before, which is even bigger, a lot of times people can be very siloed, and you can have, your organization has goals and things that you need to hit and like metrics that you need to, targets that you've got to get. And it can be really hard to open up a space to hear from a different team whose goals might actually be like pulling in the opposite direction from your goals, right? And so I think one thing that is often helpful is just to kind of name, like, what are the things that you guys are all trying to accomplish? Are there things that we can do to like mutually help each other reach our goals? Do we need to adjust those goals from the outset in order to be successful? So are you going to need help, like going to your leadership and saying, I need to change these goals that we agreed because this new information has come in? So a lot of times, actually, my job is partly like giving other teams backup to be flexible and say, and like to go with them and say, this is why this is important that we're suggesting this pivot. So like a lot of times people bring me in as like the researcher, like expert to say, this is why this is important, because sometimes in a big company, leadership doesn't necessarily always have visibility onto what an individual team is doing. And so if that team moves forward without getting that buy-in, it could be difficult for them to really get traction on the project. So you want to make sure everyone's really aligned on the goals at the beginning, and then you can get into the tactics as well.
I like how you talk about advocacy from inside out. You're almost advocating within your teams, and then you're advocating outside for safety.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's like you can't build a bridge without foundations at both ends, right? And I think that in my career, I've had experience as an academic researcher, as somebody working in an advocacy context, working with young people as a media literacy educator, and now I work in the tech industry. And I often say, I don't think that my goals, my kind of professional and personal goals in this work have changed all that much, but where I sit has changed. But I think that makes me a really good partner, right? Because again, you need somebody on the other side to build that bridge across, right? I like to be that person with groups like yourselves and others to be like, okay, how can we get there?
Building off of what you were just saying about building bridges, I think often it's easy to feel like there's a disconnect between like youth and social media companies, and it can often feel contentious. So what is one message that you have for youth just regarding any of the work that you do or making internet safer that you would just like to share with the world?
I think I would say your voices and perspectives do really matter, and that there are, I can know that it can sometimes feel opaque to figure out how to get that message across. But even if it's something like in product reporting, that actually does matter. Like when you block people, when you report people, we use those signals. I think a lot of young people in particular think, it doesn't matter what I do, the company is the company. And so obviously for young people like yourselves who are part of groups that are directly engaging with the tech industry, realize that actually you have a lot of power in what you say. But even just young people using the platform, there are ways that you can actually give feedback, and don't hesitate to do that, because actually those, not necessarily every individual report, like the content may not be violative, but we look at those signals and we take those into account, right? And I think people don't necessarily always realize that it is actually as responsive as it is. So I think that's one thing I would say overall, is the way you shape your environment also has a big impact on what we see as well.